Hey reader, this is Centaur here. I was not intending to make this video, but for any of you who have been following the Tell Me a Tale blog over on the Middle-earth Strategy Battle game for any of the last 12 years, you know that when an errata drops, the TMAT guys talk about the errata and the changes to the game. And as a guy who's now moving over and also doing bolt action content in addition to Middle-earth content, I decided on our channel to keep the trend going. So, fun story. I was working actually on a video talking about what I hate about multiple rocket launchers and the one tiny fix that would totally make it a lot better. And I got sick, so I decided to wait to record that video. And lo, I wake up the next morning after the night I would have been recording it, and I discover we have an errata that touches on multiple rocket launchers. So boy, am I glad I waited. That video will still come out later on this week. I decided to just quickly get this one out to talk through the errata changes. For those of you who have never been through an errata before, or maybe this is a refresher because you've been out of the game for a while, some of these changes are just typo fixes, typesetting fixes. So, the wrong word or the wrong term is being used, and so they're updating it. Sometimes it's a points adjustment, typically because something wasn't quite adjusted on a copy paste issue or something like that. And some of them are actually changes that are going to make a difference. So I'm going to be breezing through a bunch of the first two categories, just noting, hey, this thing got updated. That's fantastic, or makes sense, or doesn't make sense. And I'm going to kind of park a little more on some of the changes that actually change how you would actually play the game. Okay. So toward that end, I'm going to start off with the FAQs and errata for the Armies of Germany book because it's only 2 pages. It's very short, and it's not even 2. It's really like a page and a half. So, we'll start off there just to get that done. And then we'll move over to the errata for the main rulebook, but even that is only 7 pages. Okay, so it's not a lot. It's not dramatic, but we'll get it underway because, as everybody knows, Centaur doesn't make short videos. So we'll get this thing, we'll get this one on the way. Go ahead and pick up something to paint while you're at it. I am eating a bowl of ice cream because that's totally what you should do when you're sick. But I figure it'll make me feel happier when I'm looking at an errata. So here we go. So to start off with, for those of you who haven't checked out the new Armies of Germany book, the intelligence officer has made a reappearance. It's appeared in 2nd edition. And the intelligence officer was pretty straightforward. It allowed you to be able to, once per game, roll a die, and basically on a 4+, you are able to grab one of your own order dice from the bag as the first activation. Okay. Some armies didn't really matter whether they went first or second or not, or they weren't worried about it because, maybe they were going for, was what we refer to as a multiple small unit or an MSU build. So when you have 30, 40 dice in the bag and your opponent only has 15 to 20, you're not that worried on law of averages about getting it. So you don't necessarily need an intel officer. I think when it first was published in Armies of Germany this time around, it was only like a 5+. I was going to tell you now, if I got to pay points for a 5+ chance once per game to get a benefit that I might have gotten without paying points for it at all, I'm definitely not taking an intel officer. 4+, I think it's more interesting, especially if you know that maybe there's like a 20 die order die cap or a 16 order die cap, so you know that you and your opponent are probably pretty even Steven when it comes to dice. You could do that. I still don't think I would take one because I'm just not sure what the value add would be for the points I'm spending to get this, right? If this was a 10, 15 point upgrade, maybe it's worth it because definitely there have been a couple of turns in a lot of games, especially when you start getting to higher levels of competition at a tournament, where you really want to make sure you get that first turn. But I don't know, man. Like I'm not sure that I would see it as being worthwhile. It is definitely worth experimenting with, though, because we are early on in the edition. So by all means, you should totally try it. You should take it. I will probably take my time in getting there, but we'll see. Next one, the term Pathfinders is being updated to Fieldcraft, which is what we all knew it was supposed to be, and that got confirmed by Jamie over in one of the quotes on Facebook. He administrates the Warlord app, so that's not a particularly big surprise. Darmeri. By the way, I don't speak German, so I'm really sorry. I'm going to butcher a lot of this German stuff. They don't get Defend the Fatherland. That makes sense. My limited knowledge of Gendarmerie is that they were like military police, so they don't fit neatly into any of the categories for Defend the Fatherland. So that's fine. I don't care. Um, Clarifying that you have to use early war Waffen SS for early and mid-war period. You can't use the late war option. Makes sense because assault rifles, the STG 44 hasn't come around yet. So that checks out. I don't think it matters one way or another, but it does exist. Waffen SS Cavalry Squad changed the cost of veteran to plus 15 points each. Now, this is interesting, of course, because, and I'm trying to remember whether Waffen SS Cavalry start with the horses or whether you have to buy the horses on top of that. I feel like that's probably the case. Starting at 15 points, if they're adding just fanatics, checks out. If they already have the horse, this is dramatically undercosted, and you should be running these all the time. But I think they have to buy the horses separate. I'm pretty sure that this is just 13 points for a veteran plus 2 points for fanatics. And I think the original print in the Armies of Germany book was 16, assuming that fanatics was still plus 3, when in this edition it's now plus 2. So if that's the case, it's fine. Works out. Fallschirmjäger can take AT grenades. Some people like those. I don't like them. I have a lot of reasons. It's all based on math. Deep dive videos coming in a couple weeks. Just suffice it to say, if you like it, great. You can take it. Fantastic. I love having more options for people that want it. Volksgrenadier changed the special rule from Defend the Fatherland to For the Fatherland. I suspect it's the exact same rule. It makes Volksgrenadiers what we all know them to be. It's just that since Defend the Fatherland is the name of the special rule that allows you to choose your different type of unit and you get certain benefits for doing that across your force, they just didn't want the names to be the same. Fair enough. I think that's a smart plan. Strum Pioneer grenade launchers have the team weapon special rule. Checks out. They have a loader, so they should have team weapon special rule. Goliath Demolition Team. This is a fun one. You can apparently use up to 2 Goliath teams to replace your required engineer platoon units. So instead of taking 2 units of Strum Pioneers, you could take 2 Goliaths, and then you could move straight into taking your flamethrower teams or, additional Strum Pioneers. Now, this is, first of all, not available to early war pioneers. This is only Strum Pioneers. Okay, that's the first thing to note. Which checks out because it's the Goliath, right? The Goliath didn't exist throughout the entirety of the war, so it kind of makes sense. They would limit it to one specific type of engineer section. I don't really like Goliaths, so I probably wouldn't do it. Goliath is not dramatically cheaper than just taking an engineer unit, especially since it's not like you have to take the flamethrower in an engineering unit, which would dramatically increase its cost. So I don't know how I would do it, but hey, it's an option. Always nice to have options in case you want to try something new. You should totally try it at some point just to see what happens, because again, new in the edition. Quick update that medium artillery can in fact take spotters. Fantastic. Neva Warfare is in fact a multiple rocket launcher, not a heavy mortar. Love that. Panzer III can in fact take the second coaxial MMG again. Everybody's complaining and worrying about it. Apparently paid off, which is great. I don't really care one way or another, but I do like having it. It's a nice option. Horsecar can't basically have a flag reeling in the back. That's sad, because I'm not gonna lie, I was looking forward to doing that, and then I can't, but it's fine because it's probably for the best, for all parties involved. I mean, it's basically a cheaper Oval Blitz, and we can't have any of that. And then, yeah, just confirming you can't take double machine guns on every single half track that you take. That would have been fun too, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just not gonna lie, that would have been really fun. Apparently they're getting rid of DACA transports. That's fine. I just don't really care. And then trucks and Maltiers, which it's mentioned in their text that they had pintle-mounted machine guns commonly for anti-air defense. You can in fact take a pintle-mounted MMG covering forward arc. Great. Love it when that happens. The next 2 ones are just changing the word options to special rules. That's probably just a copy decision. At one point they were using the word options, changed it to special rules. That's fine. Schiffwagen, clarification on points, that's fine. Kettenkrad, Kento recoilless artillery, since those are technically separate. That's good to know, not surprising, works out, that's great. Field cars and light trucks, because I think the Kettenkrad, as I recall, could only tow light AT guns before. Now you can also tow recoilless artillery, which works really well for things like Fallschirmjäger, who used recoilless artillery, as I recall. So that's kind of probably the strategic reason for it. It's fine, I like that, that's good. You apparently don't get amphibious field cars and light trucks, which is sad because I like the amphibious rule. I think we should have more of it. But it makes sense. And you can't have 6 guys all sitting on your mule. That checks out. That's fine. Good with that. And then Q&A for FAQs on this one. Some of this, okay, I'm not gonna lie, this first one is a little bit confusing. And I gotta say, when I first saw it, I was a little confused as to what was even being talked about. But effectively, because of the fact that inexperienced Waffen-SS units, if they were to fail an order test and they pass the roll, they get to make a move. But what happens if that move moves through terrain? Right? Because if you move through terrain, you don't get your full movement, you get treated as a half move. And so if they advance instead, do they get to move and shoot off of this compulsory move? And the answer is no. You just basically get your half movement. I think that's the right decision. However, I will just note in passing that if there's one major change I would make to the game, to the move chart, it's instead of saying advance only, it would just say don't double your move. No double move on a run. That's what I would do. It's still a run action. I would still treat it as a run action. It still gets resolved as a run action. You just don't get your double move off of it. Okay, that's how I would do it. It solves the whole problem of not being able to run through difficult terrain, but wanting to assault people into difficult terrain. It solves everything. It's actually quite elegant, relatively quick and easy. People understand what's going on. I feel like it's a lot easier than just saying advance only. But hey, 6 of one, half dozen of another. Not my decision. I'm not in charge. Flak 37. If you're taking it as the flak, well, if you're taking the 37 millimeter flak 36, but maybe you want to model up a flak 43 because you think that the Zwilling looks better, can you do that? The answer is yes. Have the same gun, have the same stats. You can use them interchangeably. It doesn't matter. That's great. Love that. The next one is actually based on the preview for the AOG book. It came out because they showed the Sturmtiger page, and it was still showing D6 pins. And this led me and many other people to ask the question, hey, does the Sturmtiger still get D6 pins, or is it going to drop to D3 like every other heavy howitzer? And we have our FAQ that confirms it's still D6 pins, and it's re-rollable, which makes me kind of low-key a little bit want to pick back up a Sturmtiger, because that means you could be pumping out 3-4 pins reliably, and reliably more than 4. Every single turn you shoot at something with this thing, which is a great way when stacking up with other stuff to just completely pin out a unit in a single turn, which would be pretty crazy. And I'm not going to lie, would be pretty fun. You're also guaranteed that the unit that gets hit with that thing on the next turn is very likely to rally on the following turn, which means after a Sturmtiger hits a unit, you can pretty safely start mortar arranging in on that unit, because you're probably going to get a second turn to try going for it. And if you drop enough mortars on it, you're likely to hit with a couple of them to continue stacking on this guy. So I think this might be a good baseline for pin generation. We'll have to see. It's a lot of points, so like you'd really have to build your army around it. But a Sturmtiger and a Panzer I as your armored platoon, supported by a heavy weapons platoon with a bunch of mortars in it. Maybe go for AT rifles instead of Panzerschrecks just to save points, and then a really solid rifle squad to keep them safe. Maybe even throw in a recce platoon in order to just give yourself some extra infantry squads. And I think this could work. I think this could be interesting. I think it's at least worth trying because, again, we're early on in the edition. We should try it. And then just a clarification that if an MMG is not specified as firing only to one specific arc, then it has a 360 arc of fire. That's great. I think that's actually mentioned in the rulebook, but it is nice, again, just to have it reiterated nice and clear cut. If the arc is not specified, it's assumed to be 360. That's fantastic. And that's it for this one. So we'll move straight on because my video is already getting long, considering that we only went through 2 pages of erratas and FAQs. And we're into the rule book. It's nice to have a quick clarification saying, hey, if you have a one-shot weapon, Panzerfaust, flamethrower, things like that, you're never required to shoot it. You can always choose not to shoot it. It's always nice. Spotters. This one is a big change because it changes a little bit. And in order to explain this change, I'm going to actually explain how it worked in version 2, how it now works in version 3, and then how it was errata to now work as we progress through version 3. Okay. So in version 2, certain units, mostly traditional field artillery, howitzers, and mortars, were able to purchase spotters for 10 points. And then that unit could then use its own spotter. So you'd mark off which spotter belonged to which, and then you'd fire. And then in third edition, they noted that certain units could use spotters, still have to be regular or veteran in order to utilize the line of sight of the spotter. But any weapon could draw line of sight from any spotter, which is great, right? They're using the same frequencies, so, why not be able to talk to each other? That's fine. But there was no specification on how many units could use it, which means, hypothetically, you could have 2 regular light mortars in your rifle section, 5 more light mortars in a heavy weapons platoon, 3 light howitzers and a medium howitzer with a spotter in your artillery platoon, and possibly 5 more self-propelled guns with like light howitzers, or they were mortar carriers or something like that. And you could have 16 indirect fire weapons potentially ranging in, all by the means of one Chad, effectively, who was tracking individual shots all across the battlefield and potentially really being the MVP for his entire team for the game. Okay. And they're trying to rein that in because he's feeding information to people, right? And so the way that the errata changes it is that now the crew is again able to see through any spotter, but any given spotter can only spot for a single weapon per turn. Okay, not per activation, because otherwise, obviously, it wouldn't change anything. But per game turn, it has to pick one. Okay, which is not bad because it still means that, hey, if I'm a light howitzer or a medium howitzer and I'm taking advantage of, say, a mortar's spotter, right, or something like that, and I'm just firing across the table to the opposite diagonal corner, right, or something like that. Yeah, like I'm likely to be working on that unit for a while. So it doesn't make a dramatic difference for me to have that. It's okay as long as I know, hey, this guy is going to be tied up helping the medium howitzer, helping the light howitzer, helping the heavy mortar or whatever, then it's fine. The other change, and this is what caused some people on Facebook to lose their minds, and fair enough, I understand this, is they said that if the firing unit switches to a different spotter, this resets the ranging in process, just as if the unit had moved. Okay, now on its face, this actually also makes sense, right? Where, if you're switching spotters, it's not like the other guy was taking notes on what spotter number 1 was saying over the radio. Because he's got his own business, right? He's got his own things to deal with. So it kind of makes sense that it's like, well, now he's going to have to walk it on the target again by himself, right? So I get it. That's fine. I don't really have a problem with that. That's cool. But it does mean that there's now a lot of bookkeeping regarding spotters. Kind of. Okay. Because yes, now you have to track who owns each spotter. So that way, when that unit is removed, their spotter goes with them. Okay. You then have to keep track of which unit is firing, right? Which howitzer, which mortar is firing. And you have to keep track of which spotter is spotting for each of those, and they may not necessarily be the same. This is kind of a lot of bookkeeping, but the truth is the ratio of spotters to indirect fire weapons, while it may be pretty vast, I suspect with this change already, just saying you can only spot 1 for 1, means we're probably going to see a 1-to-1 ratio between them. And since spotters can deploy after the guns and ideally the enemy have already deployed, I don't think it's going to be unreasonable to see gun A placing spotter A in a place where it can see the kinds of targets that gun A wants to shoot at. So gun A is just going to use its own spotter. And then a mortar B is going to place its guy in a position where it can see things that it needs to be able to see, and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's going to be as dramatic a change. And I don't like it's going to change list building, but I don't think it's going to be dramatic amounts of bookkeeping in order to keep track of this. I think it's also going to see a lot of people moving in the direction that I've moved among other people when it comes to competitive play, both in 2nd edition and now in 3rd edition, of just using indirect fire elements that are inexperienced, like mortars, and using regular elements like artillery, and just realizing that you're only going to have 2 guys really ranging in by use of the spotter, 3 guys ranging in with use of the spotter, and just saying, that's fine. That's just the way it's going to have to be. And that's okay. Right. And truthfully, I haven't found too many situations on too many boards where I needed more than 2 spotters anyway. Right. So I don't know. It is a change. I don't think it's a bad change. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that it means that you're less likely to see some of the, what some people call bad form of spam. I think it's fun and I don't really mind it even when I'm on the receiving end of it. But yeah, like I think it would be okay. I think it's fine for how it works out. It also strikes me as we close out this slot on spotters and move into multiple rocket launchers that if you had a grenadier section or 2 grenadier sections, heaven forbid 3 grenadier sections, I don't know if you have enough points to do everything I've been mentioning. I mean, you could have upwards of 20 things all being ranged in by 1 spotter on a given turn under the original ruling, and I think this does help to move us a little more in the realm of, okay, buddy, let's just keep this a little more real. Okay, and I think that's fine. Multiple launchers. Multiple launchers got to change. The big one being that now their minimum range is increased to 36 inches. So it's still treated like a heavy mortar. Still does a 3-inch template. Still does a pen +3. Still doesn't range in. It's only firing on a 6 every time. But now it has a minimum range of 36. So it's 36 to 72 inches instead of 12 to 72 inches. I think this is a great change. Ironically, it means I can cut a whole slide from my talk on multiple rocket launchers that I'm going to release this week, because that was going to be my quick fix to multiple launchers, which means I think it's a great change. I think it's a very good change. And I know there's going to be people who are saying, oh no, this makes them completely unusable. I think these people are fighting in a very Napoleonic way. And while there was rocket artillery in the Napoleonic era, it's come a long way going into World War II. And I think that this means you're just going to see multiple launchers parked in corners, firing at people on the opposite half of the board lengthwise instead of widthwise. Okay, that's how you're actually going to see multiple launchers used. If you're starting in quarter, if you assume you have quarters of 1, 2, 3, 4, you're firing into the opposite quarter. Does that make sense? Firing into the opposite quarter instead of firing at the one that's directly above you or directly below you. Right? That's how I think you're supposed to do it now. And for that, they'll be perfectly acceptable, right? I mean, believe it or not, people in 2nd edition and people starting out here in 3rd edition have been using indirect fire from howitzers with 36-inch range for a long time. Okay, this is not a new minimum range requirement, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing. It means that there's also a very good way to be able to fight them, which is move up, don't hide, get in there, right? And that's gonna be good, because if you're on the center line of the board, multiple launcher that's roughly across from you is not going to be able to reach you ever. So, you can keep yourself safe from that. Now, a smart person, what they're going to do is they're going to put 1 or 2 multiple rocket launchers in one corner. They're going to put 1 or 2 in the other corner, and they're going to keep you on your toes, right? Like that's the smart way to do it. And per the fact that this errata replaces the previously published multiple launcher errata, there's no more, you can't use spotters. Okay, so a multiple launcher can now use spotters again. Okay, I think what this is going to do, now that multiple launchers are also back in the game for using spotters again, I think we're going to see the stock on sniper teams bump up a little bit. I know a lot of people have been really disappointed with snipers. I think snipers are going to be a really good way of getting rid of spotters, especially since spotters have now been confirmed to all have the infiltrator special rule. Before this, they deployed like infiltrators did, but they didn't have the special rule, which means they didn't get that +1 to their cover saves. Now they do, as long as they're not running, right, and not advancing. So as long as they're not moving, if they're on the ground, they're getting that +1 bonus. Which means I think this provides yet another reason for snipers. Snipers help to keep you safe from multiple rocket launchers on the other half of the board. And that's good, because every unit should have a purpose. And I like it when snipers have a purpose. I think we're also going to see a lot of machine gun teams being lined up to shoot at spotters, which, complete aside, was also a very effective way of dealing with spotters in World War II. And so, again, it also bumps up, I think, the stock on machine gun teams, but we'll see. We got a clarification that, yeah, if you haven't actually deployed your officer yet, if they're still in reserve, still in first wave, they could be in a transport. So I don't want to say off table, because technically speaking, a unit in a transport is also off table. But if you haven't deployed them yet, they don't get snapped to. You don't get to bring, you don't get to draw 1 dice on a first wave and bring on 5 units, right? Or whatever. You don't get to do that. The officer plus 5 things, including his own transport. You don't get to do that. But you do still get to use it when you're in the transport, once you're on the table, right? So so it's still usable. It's good, but it puts a slight limitation on it. I think that's fine. Clarification on artillery units. I appreciate that they did this. They do clarify, yes, you have to be within 1 inch of any part of the gun model. So this is different from, this is the difference between 3rd edition and 2nd edition's Everybody has to be within 2 inches of the breach, which is fine for 3-man or 4-man teams. It's worse when you have 7 men or 8 men sitting around a flak 88 or a Japanese artillery that's been upcrewed. This one adds, the errata adds in that they still have to be kept in formation as described for infantry units. So they still have to be within 1 inch of each other. So there's no 4-poster bed approach, which people were doing, which makes perfect sense under the wording of 3rd edition, where, you've got your gun and then you've got the other guys at 4 corners around it, right? Or 3 corners around it if it's a 3-man team, or 5 corners around it if you're one of the cool guys who's taking a heavy howitzer at 3rd edition. Now at least they do have to be close to each other, which means, hey, if you mortar shoot, you're going to hit more than one guy, right? When shooting an artillery piece. And that's what it was primarily designed around, was counter battery fire with HE will now work again against artillery, which is fine. As an artillerist who runs artillery most of the time, it's fine. We've learned to accept it. It's okay. That's a fine rule. Artillery and shooting line of sight. Enemy shooting against the artillery unit can draw line of sight to either the gun or the crew models. This helps to solve another issue that people had, where because you measure, range and distance and stuff from the breach, you could technically like hide most of your models really far away. And if you had to draw to the crew, then you might have to draw like through a building. This now specifies, nope, as long as the gun's sticking out, you can always shoot at the gun if you need to. Just remember that you have to measure to the center of the gun, so the breach, effectively, on each of these things. So that's fine. Vehicles and orders. Just changing that, if you reverse move, it has to be straight backwards with no pivot. Vehicle must move as fast as it can. So before that, there was thoughts of, well, do you have to move absolutely as fast and as far as you possibly can move? The answer now is a resounding yes, and that could potentially mean that you run completely off the table and you count as a casualty, right? You effectively retreat. So a lot of people I know are really scared about this. I understand this. I think this is a very good argument for ending all of your moves so that you're facing your rear toward a building, obstacle that you cannot cross, piece of, rough terrain or something like that you cannot cross. And I think this is going to bump up the stock on wheeled vehicles. I think we're going to see a lot more people running wheeled vehicles because, hey, I am literally not allowed to move through a forest. I'm not allowed to move through a river. I'm not allowed to move through a ruin, which means if I end my movement so that that's directly behind me, I won't be backing up very much, right? Because the rules say I cannot move into impassable terrain. So I think that's the answer to this. It does mean, yeah, maybe don't play with your vehicles 4 inches away from the edge or even 9 inches away from the edge. Move them up a bit. It is going to mean if you're running armored platoons, you are not going to be sitting back. You're going to be moving up at least closer to the third, middle third or middle half of the board, just because you don't want to run off on a failed test, which is fine. Okay. Talking about 2 or more weapons on the same mount. It's just, again, clarifying that, vehicle machine guns, again, only get the half shots, which is fine. Removing some extra language on transport vehicles. Removing some stuff, again, on command vehicles, same deal. We got the clarification on what's intended by the command vehicle thing. People were arguing and complaining about this even before the book came out. I thought the wording was quite clear, which is you choose your vehicles. Out of those, if one's a command vehicle, it's your leader. If none of them have command vehicle, then purchase one. And now it even mentions specifically that, if you have a transporter tow that has the command vehicle by default, you can take that as your mandatory platoon command vehicle. Okay. Which is mostly a thing for like Germany and France. They have a couple of those that have command vehicles in the transport section. So I appreciate that this is, again, nice and clean. They even specify that, if you don't have one such vehicle in this platoon, you can give to any vehicle with the categories listed above for 10 points. And then later on, we're going to see this revisited again in the FAQs, talking about it where, yeah, like even if you have a choice between the two, then you can just choose to purchase it on one over and against another, which means effectively the Char2C doesn't have to take a 75-point upgrade, right? Like that's really what this is clarifying, because that's the only case where this is a really, really big deal and where people would be right to make a big complaint about it. So yay, got that cleared up. Recce platoons got clarifications that you don't have to buy a ton of transports. You can buy big transports to transport all your dudes. You just have to be able to transport all the dudes. Now, it's worth noting that the rule still stands on the same page talking about how cavalry don't have to be supported. So if you have cavalry in a recce platoon, you don't have to worry about that. That's okay. We got updates to base cost to confirm that 5 inexperienced dudes do in fact cost 35 points. Confirmation that 70 points worth of Rangers is only 5 dudes instead of 6. We've got a clarification that the Marine Squad entry of adding extra pistols to people, which didn't really do anything at the start of the edition, is now that you can basically drop the cost of your Marine Squad by up to 3 points by replacing a rifle with a pistol. I don't know too many situations where I would do this. Like if you're taking a submachine gun heavy list and so you plan to be playing really up close, maybe the rifles don't matter that much. I don't like it because pistols don't currently give the assault keyword, but I'm going to hold judgment in case the Marine, like, I don't know, maybe if you take Marines, because right now Marines look exactly like Airborne in terms of the substructure, subtype way of running these things. Maybe they get a special bonus that pistols gain the assault keyword, which I think would be great. I think it would be great that if pistols in a U.S. Marine Corps squad gained assault, I think that's a great way of doing it because you can avoid, crazy shenanigans with, inexperienced hordes of pistols, which I thought was hilarious and fun and dangerous. So why not allow them to do it? But if you're really afraid of people getting assault that easily, then maybe this is fine. I think that would be a good way of handling it, but we'll see. If they don't get assault, I don't see this being a very useful upgrade. So I probably wouldn't take it. The M51, as we all expected, gets treated as a vehicle mount, even though it's an artillery choice. So it's only getting 12 shots instead of 24 with a +1 to wound with that 48-inch range. I bought one of these. I didn't buy a ton because I figured there was going to be an errata coming down that was going to look basically just like this, seeing as this is the exact same mount on the M16 MGMC. Honestly, I'm fine with it. 12 shots with a +1 to wound at 48 inches is still great. Just being honest, it's still great. So I'd probably still run it. I think it's still worth it. It's obviously not as great value as it was before, but I think it's still worth running. So no, you haven't wasted your money by spending $50, 50 USD on one of these things. You might have wasted your money if you spent like $200 buying 4 of them. But that's more because I don't think you're going to have 4 clear firing lanes rather than, because I think that the weapon itself is not worthwhile. Yeah, clarification that, infantry can take the engineer special rules. Very helpful. I think this is the one for the British, basically to make sure the Brits can actually do it. Home guard unit, striking the whole unarmed thing. This is going to come up again in the FAQ. Clarifying how many special forces you can buy on page 236. AT guns. Okay. AT gun with a rotating platform. Actually pretty cool. I like that. Could be very useful. Might be worth looking into. Could be worth taking. I think this is one, if I'm not mistaken, this is one of those, this is one of like the gun trucks or something like that, that has, I think it was like a rear-facing light AT gun or something like that, but now it's on a rotating platform. That's pretty good. Great. More power to them. Might be worth taking now. Stuart Light Tank, just confirming you only get Recce if you take the Recce option. Makes sense. Confirms that the open top only applies to the Mark 1, which makes sense because the Mark 2 Crusader does not, in fact, have an open top. Confirming custoff, the extra guys again, and then again, unarmed people do in fact get to fight in close quarters, so they strike that section, which is great. This one's spicy. The SU-152 and the ISU-152, it confirms that the howitzer has a +5 to penetration. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's a really, really good chance to wound most of the armor most people is going to have. And it's doing it with an HE template, which also means you're really good at destroying infantry, although you were just as good, right? Pen +4 and pen +5 against something you're going to wound on 2s anyway. It doesn't change anything. But hey, good chance that you're wounding anything and you're applying pins to everything in the game, since your penetration isn't going to go down at long range. And the highest people can go is damage value 11. So D3 automatic pins from the from the SU-152. That's not bad. I'll take it. Confirming the towing on half tracks. This is great. Matches up with a bunch of the other half tracks, which is good. IJ and SNLF can take engineers, which means you can take engineering platoons. Again, we expected this fix. Everybody was talking about it, so we knew this was coming. Prime movers, they gain slow. That makes sense too, because they were not particularly fast. Apparently we're adding the following box out, which is the Lend-Lease, and we get specification on what kinds of things we can take, kind of, right? We don't know whether we can take upgrades on the M3 Stuart. We don't know which variants of the M3 Lee we can take. If you're playing in my circuit, like, if I'm playing against you and I'm your opponent, I'm just saying you can choose anything that says M3 for either of these, right? So, for the M3 lead, that's not a big deal because it's only like the M3, M3A1, M3A3, M3A5. But for the M3 Stewart, you wouldn't be able to take the entries for, say, the M5 Stewart, for example. Okay. But otherwise, I think it's fine. It would probably be wise to get a clarification on whether Churchill also includes the AVRE variant, because I don't think the Soviets ever used that. I'm pretty sure it was just the Mark 1, maybe up through the Mark 3. But it's things like that. Like, it would be kind of nice to have this spelled out. Then again, I'm also one of those people who argues that Axis support should disappear as an Army special rule for other nations, and we should just list out, you also get to take these ones from the German list, and just use whatever historically Germany actually gave them. There are decent records on this. So because of this, I think that would probably be better. But on the whole, I mean, it's a good list. You get access to the Stuart, the Tetrarch, the Lead. Those are really good tanks, depending on what you want. You get access to the M3 White Scout car, which is a fantastic armored transport. That has more difficulty running off the board if you put it with its butt facing a forest or a ruin. Just throwing it out there. Which would be important for the FAQs when we come up, seeing what happens when units are in a transport that flees off the board. You get the M17 GMC. It's not a great anti-aircraft vehicle, but it's fine. You get the Bren carrier, the Jeep, and the Ducky, all of which are also good. So yeah, I think that's great. Now we jump into FAQs. This is gonna be a lot faster, hopefully. We'll see. I feel so bad for you guys. I'm sorry. This is really dragging on. Clarification that unarmed models do in fact get to fight in close quarters, so they do have work beyond just being casualties. This is a big one. What happens to units in a transport that is destroyed because it retreats from the table? Transports or tows that are destroyed together with the vehicle. Okay, so bring them on. I'm not going to lie, 90% of my vehicles nowadays have an officer in them for this very reason. Okay. I hate it when they fail. So I just put a one-man inexperienced officer inside of the vehicle and fill up the rest with guys. And that's what we do. Clarification that if you can't fit all of the key positions, objectives on the map, then you just don't place the others and you move on. There's a weird strategy there. I'm probably not going to take advantage of it. But hypothetically, I suppose it could happen depending on placement. So there's that. If a transport or tow vehicle mounts a weapon and therefore loses transport capacity, does also lose towing? The answer is yes. Seems fine by me. It's carrying a lot of extra weight. That makes sense. This is just clarification. You can't use a Stummel as a transport option all over the place for like tons and tons of heavy firepower all over on the board. Kind of sad, but it totally makes sense because it's not in the transport section. It's in the SPG section. Okay, so it works out. But it means, hey, you could have an SPG that's helping you transport up your dudes. That's cool. I like it. Confirming how, indirect fire units ranged in on an artillery unit works. So basically, like, are you ranging in on the crew? So if they're removed, you have to re-range in if somebody recrews it or not? And the answer is no, you've ranged in on the guns, you're still ranged in. That's useful to know. Because, if I've got a light howitzer right next to a medium howitzer, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, like I could send my crew back over to man the medium howitzer, but since they're already ranged in, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe I use the lighter gun. All right, so it makes for interesting strategic choices. Maybe I don't care as much if I'm about to overrun or, in some other way remove whatever it is that ranged in on that position. So maybe I give it a beat or two in order to jump in there. But yeah, like there's options. And the reason why this matters is because there is a gimmick that you can now do per this errata. Can members of artillery pieces be transferred to other pieces even if they have different levels of experience? And what happens to the pins they have? And the answer is yes, you can. And they gain whatever the same rating is as the existing crew. So the gun effectively is specifying what the crew's veterancy is, as long as there's at least one guy there from the old crew. In addition, they carry over the pins that were on the unit that you're recrewing. So the gun is the one holding the pins, not the crew, effectively. Okay. What this means is you could purchase call it veteran, why not? Medium howitzer, and then put light howitzers nearby. And as you lose veterans crewing your medium howitzer, because that's the one they're going to range in on, you could funnel crew over from your light howitzers and effectively get free points of uprating because you didn't actually have to pay the extra points to make them veteran. They just become veteran as long as you had at least one of those veteran crew members still left, which is interesting. I'm not sure this is necessarily a good idea. But it's an interesting gimmick. It's an interesting play, and it could be a way to get a little bit of extra value out of artillery crews since you know those things are going to be mortar bait, right? So anyway, just a thing to think about when you're looking at stuff. You can try it, see what happens. It talks about tow being destroyed along with all the crew. Is the artillery piece left or removed along with its die? You treat it as if it has no crew, so you leave it there, and it can be recrewed. This is also important because it can't be run over by wheeled vehicles. So if it was being towed in the middle of a road, then it's also a further obstacle to people moving, which is interesting. Can units that do not have spotters in the interest benefit from line of sight? Yes, they still can. Okay. Can the last operator of an artillery piece be removed to take over another? The answer is yes. You do lose an order dice, but yeah, you could technically consolidate your crews to make a better crew. Probably just in case you wanted to avoid like one of those team weapon penalties where you're down to one guy, so you're getting a -1 to hit. You could move a guy over from another crew that's also devastated and at least have one effective gun instead of two ineffective guns. It's interesting. It's nice to know you have it. We did get the clarification that a tank with slow load, if it's snapped to by an officer, it can be the first thing to activate because the officer was technically activated first and then it was given one and then you resolve that one first, which is interesting. Yeah, again, clarification on how many spotters, how many spotters can a spotter spot if a spotter can spot for things that need spotting, right? We got that clarified, which is 1. That's the answer. The answer is 1. If the vehicle has transport, but it's not in the transport section, does it suffer from enemy proximity? So basically, like, is there a chance that it just runs off the table if it's closer to the enemy? And the answer is no, because it is not, in fact, a transport. It just has the ability to transport. Okay. Yeah. Template stuff for the planes. We already know that one. Can I take a vehicle that does not have command vehicle and upgrade it to make it platoon commander if I do have a vehicle which already starts with it? The answer is apparently yes, you can. This is interesting. It means just confirming that you basically choose the models that you want, and then you look at them, and then from that selection, you then get to choose which one you're going to make your platoon commander. But this seems to specify that even if you had one in there that does start with command vehicle available to it, not that it starts with it purchased, but available, you could still choose to choose something else and make that your command vehicle. So even if you have, say, 2 Samuas and a Char 2C, the Char 2C has command vehicle available to it as a 75-point upgrade to take both command vehicle and an upgrade to damage value 10. But you could choose to say, per the errata, nope, I'm going to put it on the Samua and pay 10 points. And that is legal. Okay. Similarly, if a transport vehicle has the command value rule, then can you use that as the armored platoon commander? And the answer is yes. Right. And that, again, also kicks in for the French. They get like a 20-point transport that can take command vehicle for like an extra, handful of points. Again, it's chips by comparison to something like, say, a Samoa, right? So you also have that option available to you, okay? Again, escape reaction, it should be advance or run depending on which escape move it makes. In general, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a run, as I recall, for most things. But there are some, I think it's the dual direction steering stuff that can make like an advanced run or something like that. But basically just specifying again, it's dependent on which one you're actually using, right? Sometimes it's assigned for you, sometimes it's not. They clarify that, if an obstacle is less than an inch thick, then you can't actually occupy it with the opponent. So because you'd be within an inch of each other. So because of that, whoever's there first is the one's going to get the benefit of it. And the other guy can move up pretty close to it, but not within an inch of the enemy unit. And they would still have the penalty of cover right there available to them, right? They also make the point, and I think this is also right, that it's possible that if it's thicker than an inch, then maybe it's just not, like it's just rough ground or impassable terrain. It's not actually an obstacle. That can be defended, right? Or something like that, because it's big, right? Confirmation that common transport vehicles are available even if you're using the Armies of books. That's fantastic. Glad that we got that confirmed. So all of those common transport vehicles, the heavy field cars, light trucks, the tractors, artillery tows and stuff like that, they're all available all the time. Doesn't matter whether they're in your book or not. Yeah, some clarification on wording and stuff like that. All of this, again, is fine. In the Army list, some infantry units have the option to have some machine guns, while they're specified replace their rifles with submachine guns. Is there a difference? And they just specify no. There's no difference. Great. Okay. Tashanka counts as wheel vehicle. Yay. I'm glad it does because it has wheels. I don't know why it wouldn't, but here we are. You can apparently have green shirkers, which is cool. I don't know that I would take it, but you can. Specifications that you can't shoot through floors in a building. Specification that units outside buildings can shoot enemies in buildings if another floor of the same building has friendly troops. They cannot do that. I guess basically they're too close to each other, question mark. I don't know that I would have made that ruling, but hey, here we are. Maybe it's because you have the potential of like collapsing the building depending on what you're shooting at it with. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But anyway, stuff like that. The Su-76I can take armor-piercing ammo. That's great. I don't know. I don't really run the Su-76. I wouldn't really know whether it's a good idea or not. But hey, it's always nice to have options. So I'm a big fan of that. If units both end the turn on ambush and wish to fire at each other, how do you decide who goes first? It's roll off. That makes sense. That's great. Heavy autocannons, heavy guns for the purpose of movement. Yep, that makes sense. I think it's even specified that there are heavy anti-aircraft guns. And I think basically the rule is, does it have light guns or does it have heavy guns? And then obviously in some cases, like in the M51, if they have the cumbersome rule, it tells you that you treat it like it's a heavy gun. Right? Can I have more than one vehicle with the command vehicle rule in the same armament platoon? The answer is yes, right? So you can have a lot of morale bubbles running around for them. It's just that one of them is the platoon commander, and that one's the one that can snap to another vehicle, right? Whenever it activates. Does running toward as fast as possible toward the closest table edge result in the unit entering a building or transport? Can they assault? No. No, they can't. They cannot do that, which makes sense. If a unit is in base contact with an empty building but not entering it, can another unit enter the building? It says a unit can enter a building that has other units in base contact with it, and then the controlling player needs to move their models out of contact with the building in their next move, right? Or assault it, which kind of makes sense. Again, it's the whole unit should be at least 1 inch apart, right? Sort of thing. And then interaction between being at full strength and the commissar rules. Commissar rule takes preference, right? So that kind of makes sense. So again, this is the whole, like, since you get to reroll failed morale checks, the question is basically like, okay, if I have a full strength inexperienced squad, can I roll for being full strength first? And then if I fail that second roll, does my commissar kick in? And then I gotta unalive somebody in order to make the next check. The answer is no, commissar comes first. Okay, so maybe don't run full strength squads, maybe, question mark, or at least just don't count on that extra ability, or maybe run them full strength when they're not near the commissar, right? Because it's not like commissar is battlefield wide. Clarification that officers can be mounted on horses as long as you take a unit of horses, which is great. As a Polish player, I appreciate that. Firing as a light AT gun, do you get the bonuses? If a gun is firing as another type of gun, it uses the rules for the other type of gun as long as it's in that firing mode. So Zis 3 can get a +1 to hit if firing as an AT gun, but it wouldn't gain that +1 to hit when it's firing indirectly as a howitzer. Okay, so that's great. Huzzah. Nice to have that clarified. That's how I always read it. So it's always nice when it comes through that I'm not going crazy on reading things through. How many AT teams can I include? The answer should be 9, right? Well, in a heavy weapons platoon, each AT team slot becomes 3, or just the one. Just one AT team slot per platoon can be replaced by 0 to 3. So that's interesting, right? Therefore, in a rifle platoon, you could have 3, and then in a heavy weapons platoon, you could have 3 AT rifle teams, or 0 to 2 AT rifle teams, and 0 to 3 lunge mine AT teams. That's interesting. I wonder if we'll see something similar for the for other nations, because obviously China can also take this. This also does give a little more protection, shall we say, to the Soviet extra selection options, because they get extra selection, 3 counting as 1 for every AT team, right? So it's interesting. In that sense, I'm glad it protects the Soviets. I do think that kind of gimps the Japanese a little. I don't tend to run more than 3 anyway, but it is nice to know. When a unit with fieldcraft assaults an enemy in rough ground, does the enemy not gain defensive positions? The answer is they don't, which is great. That might make fieldcraft units more interesting and more likely to use. It obviously still doesn't remove the other benefits like reactive fire and stuff like that. But hey, it's not bad. And who knows, if we get a fieldcraft unit for the British, and you could take that blood curdling charge still, so that way people can't reactive fire against you. That could be a very interesting combo. That could be really interesting. We'll see. Maybe Chernitz will get something like that. Because I would like to see the British infantry be a little more different from each other. Can I fire a rear-facing turret-mounted MMG even if the main gun does not fire that turn? Yes. So you just basically rotate it around and shoot at people. I faced quite a few Japanese players. They do that all the time, so that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, let's see. Is there anything else that's actually new, right? Yeah, platoon commanders can only snap through one person if they want to, right? Yeah, this one we've already seen. Place the center of the inch on or between bases of the target unit. Same page, it says that the only two criteria are covering as many models as possible and not clipping any friendly models. So which one is it? Well, it's basically like, if they're a Venn diagram, it should be the place that it falls in between, is basically what it is, right? Let's see here. Special abilities of officers mounted on transports. No, they cannot do that because you would need to issue a fire order to the observer, right? And that makes sense, right? Like I think we've talked about this before that, and I feel like this should have been understood as the rule all along that yeah, a forward observer who is in an open top to soft skin transport, while they can still technically like see and give orders to people that are outside of it and stuff like that, they can't call an airstrike because the only orders you're allowed to use while you're mounted up is rally and down or run in advance to get out, right? So because of that, yeah, like you're not allowed to use fire, so you can't use fire. In story scenarios, when it comes to things like first turn, like basically who's how do you how you deploy them? Well, it's start of the game phase, right? Nice and easy. Yeah. Other, I mean, again, pretty straightforward clarifications. Nothing too crazy going on here. Uh, Yeah, so there is a note here on unit cohesion, right? Because sometimes you don't want to take out your Browning automatic rifle or your light machine gun, your flamethrower, right? But that means that now you're going to end up with a gap of more than 1 inch in a unit, and basically it's that they still work the same way, but when they perform their next move, then they do need to reestablish formation. This can get a little dicey because of the whole 1 inch apart for units rule, because you'd have to remember that those are two separate units that are there. Depending on how you do your base work or your color patterns or color palettes or things like that, it may not necessarily be that big of a deal. If you're only running one of a given type of unit, it's not going to be a given a big deal. But hypothetically, it could be. But honestly, I think it's fine. I think this is okay. If I was a rules writer personally, I think I would have just written something that at the end of a turn, any unit that's not in unit cohesion moves into unit cohesion, and then you call it a day, right? That's probably how I would solve it. And then that way it's end of turn, in between, when we're packing up the dice and stuff like that. So it shouldn't slow the game down too much, well, yeah, I think that would probably work out fine. Is unit hit by splash, take pins. Only the unit that is the target of an HE shooting attack takes pins from being hit. Any other clipped by the HE template may take damage, but does not receive pins. Now, this is interesting. Okay. Similarly, clipping on it may not go down as a reaction. It is not itself being shot at by the HE weapon. Okay. So this is an interesting point. It means that stacking pins on people with big HE templates is going to be a little harder to do, right? Which is fine. I think that's okay. I don't think I would personally rule it this way, but it seems fine. Because really, this only affects heavy howitzers effectively, right? Like it's very difficult to get more than one unit under any template if you're centering it on something. If you're only going out an inch, inch and a half away from the thing, because they have to be at least an inch from each other, and you're not allowed to pre-measure, right? So most people are not going right up to an inch away from fellow units. They're a little bit further than that. But yeah, just the clarification that both they can't go down in order to reduce the number of hits, which against a heavy howitzer would be pretty big. And also that, but also the trade-off is that same splash unit also doesn't take any pins from it. So, well, there you go. That does reduce the effectiveness of some of those area of effect weapons a little bit. Yeah, clarifications on flamethrowers. Does Soviet bomber apply to close combat? Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, controlling player gets to place the token for the aircraft, which is interesting. Yeah, officers can use their special abilities in friendly units within range. Yeah, that can see inside, right? So like, you have to be able to actually see the officer. They have to be able to reasonably communicate. That makes sense. Range leads the way is resolved before prep bombardment. That also makes sense. And then when a unit in first wave or reserve comes onto the deployment zone, can they come in from a point on the short edge table too? Yes, they can. Moving straight into no man's land, the same is true for off the table in scenarios that allow them to do so, right? So they're confirming that these are your table edges. It's not just the long edge, right? Similarly, these are your table edges. It's not just the long edge, right? It could also be the short edge, which is interesting. It changes a few things, not a whole lot for, how I would do things, but hey, good to know. You know, that adds a little bit more versatility and options, and depending on the style of the board, it might make it a lot easier to be able to get to stuff, right? Because depending on terrain layout and stuff like that, getting all the way across and off of the opposite board edge could be a real slog. And that's it. I've kept you guys long enough. This is you know, this is Sendra's review of the FAQs. Obviously, the next ones will be a lot shorter because I'm just going to do whatever the changes are from the most recent one. We're not going to go over old time stuff. But since this is my first time doing an FAQ errata review, maybe it's a good thing just to kind of go a little deeper into all of them. What are your thoughts on it? You know, am I off? Are some of these changes absolutely game breaking? Have certain units been completely pushed out of the meta? Has this dramatically changed things up? I don't see a whole lot of like dramatic changes to which units people are taking. I see a difference in how they're used. Because I think now we're looking at, you know, rocket artillery of various kinds, you know, multiple launchers and stuff now firing in a diagonal, just like how, you know, traditional field artillery was being used in second and third editions up to now, as opposed to being used in more of a, you know, perpendicular, you know, a parallel sort of role. I think it's fine. You know, on the whole, I don't think it actually changes all that much. Changes all make sense. If you want to run large amounts of spotters, know that it's going to require some extra book work. Do the legwork to do it, right? And then just value assess. Is it worth it to have all of that extra thinking going into whatever you want to say? Well, into whatever you want to run. I think that's fine. We're making interesting choices, and I'm a big fan of interesting choices, especially when it's grounded in reasonable things that a person could actually accomplish in a given time. And I think some of these changes were things that are very both reasonable and needed, right? Like the clarification on how you position artillery crewmen. So that way, you know, placing people in a way that actually looks like they're actually manning the gun makes sense. I like that. So let me know what you think down below. Curious to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.